Hello everybody, I'm Andy Phillips and this is Iron Concepts number 64. So after last week's Iron Concepts, we talked about the balance between what the customer wants and what you want to build. And that got me to thinking about forge welding. And I really wonder, how many of you out there still forge weld, at least on, say, a monthly basis? I would wager that there probably aren't a lot of shops that do, and is this an art that we're going to lose? Because really, I would say that the number of forge welds that a shop makes is the inverse to its productivity and its profitability. Damascus aside, it's one of those processes that just doesn't have much of a place in a modern shop. Not for the fact that it's useless. A good forge weld can be strong and nearly seamless. That's not the problem. The problem lies in that it takes a lot of skill to get a good forge weld, and even more skill to get that weld every time. Really, it's way easier to MIG weld, grind, and refinish, and it's consistent. There's no mystery involved in that. And rather than forge welding, you could even take a larger piece of bar stock, forge it down under the power hammer, and get the transition of bar stock size that you need. After all, it takes 2 heats to scarf the boss and the reins of a pair of tongs, and a third heat to weld them together. And that's if you get the weld on the first try. And I have never gone a whole day and made more than 2 forge welds and not missed at least one of them. All that, and you could have just started out with a larger piece of bar stock and chopped it down on the power hammer and been done in 1 heat. And if you're really good and that determined for efficiency, you'll draw both reins of the tongs at the same time. And while I will admit, artistically speaking, there are some applications that involve texture and assembly that are absolutely stunning for forge welding, but they're on the periphery. The 2 main cases where a smith would forge weld are when they don't have enough power to draw down the bar stock to get the transition that they need, and then on the other hand, where they don't have enough material there and they simply need to assemble the material up in order to get what they need. But those transitions are easily made with a power hammer now, and that assembly is easily done with a MIG welder. 16 years ago, when I got started in this, there were shops out there that smithed for a living that didn't have a MIG welder, and they didn't have a power hammer. But now, it's hard to imagine a professional shop these days that doesn't have a 110 MIG and a tire hammer at the very least. In turn, many of the people that advocated for this traditional method did so not because they believed so greatly in it, but because they didn't have another option. And in turn now, with these tools creeping in from every direction and becoming common, that's what kills this type of technique, and that's what kills this type of skill. And there is a lot of skill and technique that goes into making a consistent forge weld. Of course, there are also a lot of techniques and tools that can help you along the way. And there's part of me that wants to stick on the point that those improvements have actually made it easy enough to where it is still a valid process. After all, there are dozens of welding compounds, and the shop that I did my apprenticeship in, along with every shop that I worked in thereafter, we used to make our forge welds with a torch, a process which makes it vastly, vastly easier to get a good, clean forge weld every single time, even if it does take 2 people to do that. And as much as I want it to be true, as much as I want it to be a practical process, no matter how much we improve on it, I still don't think it's enough. And I think, over time, my can of SureWeld will collect dust on top of it and eventually get lost, and I'll never make another forge weld again. At least not one that I get paid for. But really, I don't think that all the bells and whistles can save this process. I don't think that they should have to, if it's a good process, if it's a worthwhile process. If you've ever come across anyone who's mastered this technique, or you've glimpsed at mastering it yourself, you know that the right person can have everything working against them, a dirty fire, a poor setup, and bad material, and yet they will still pull off decent weld after decent weld. That's the kind of skill that you don't get by demonstrating to children in some open-air museum. That's the kind of skill you don't get in the art studio. That's the type of skill that you get from having to do it, from having to make it happen. What does that person know that we don't know? We may never know. But that's it for me this week. That's all I've got to say about that. I hope you enjoy the drawing. Drop me an email, leave me a comment, but whatever you do, make sure to check in next week. So thanks for listening, and until next time, bye.